Hello, I'm Will, and I work at York Minster. Today we're going to look back nearly 2,000 years to explore the Roman history of York, or as it was known at the time, Iberacum. The Romans arrived in Britain in AD 43, looking to expand their European empire, and by AD 71 they'd begun building what eventually became a huge fortress, right where the city of York still stands today. The fortress was home to the famous 9th Legion, a group of Roman soldiers who controlled this area between the two neighbouring Iron Age tribes of the Brigantes and the Parisii. Around this fortress, an entire city grew until Iberacum became one of the most important places in Roman Britain. It was here that a new emperor was declared, and it was even used as the base to rule the whole Roman Empire for a short time. Today, nearly 2,000 years later, there are still parts of the Roman city that survive, and more elements of Roman life are being uncovered all the time. Did you know that York Minster, the city's great cathedral, is the site of the old Roman headquarters that they called the Principia? Beneath the minster, you can still see original Roman foundations, and it's not just below ground. In Museum Garden, a multangular tower used to defend the city still stands to this very day. Let's find out some more.
Hello, my name is Charlie and I work at the Yorkshire Museum. The collections on display at the Yorkshire Museum can tell us important stories about what everyday life was like in Iberacum. Some of the objects can be used to shed light on the ideas, fashions and practices that the Romans introduced to Britain. The Romans hoped that by introducing what they thought were the benefits of their rule to Britain, it would make the island easier to control. One fashion the Romans introduced to Britain was the use of mosaics to decorate the homes of the wealthy and public buildings. Mosaics were created by specialist artists who used small squares known as tesserae made of different coloured materials to create a picture or pattern. This is just a small fragment of a mosaic from Roman York. However, we do have a mosaic at the Yorkshire Museum, which we call the Four Seasons mosaic, which is the largest and most complete surviving mosaic to be found in York. You can even walk across it, so long as you take your shoes off first. The four figures on this mosaic are gods that each represent one of the four seasons. Spring is symbolised by a small bird, summer by grapes, autumn by a rake, and winter by a bare branch. People in Iberacum liked to import fashionable objects they wanted from different parts of the Roman Empire. A good example of this is this Samian-ware bowl. This type of pottery was used to serve food at fancy dinner parties and was mostly made in factories in southern and eastern France, an area which the Romans called Gaul. Not all the objects discovered in Iberacum came from different parts of the Roman Empire. Some were made using local materials. This is a Roman hairpin. It would have been used to pin a woman's hair into a fashionable style. What is special about this object, however, is that it is made from jet. Jet is a black gemstone made from fossilised wood. It can be found on the Yorkshire coast, particularly at Whitby. The Romans mined jet in Whitby before transporting it to Iberacum, where it was used to make expensive jewellery. People in Britain had been making jewellery using jet since the Bronze Age. As such, this is an example of a local practice that the Romans adopted for themselves. The Romans thought that jet had magical properties. They sometimes used it to make pendants to provide protection from evil spirits. A good example can be found in the Yorkshire Museum. This jet pendant, which shows the face of Medusa, a mythical creature whose gaze turned anyone who looked at her to stone.
Sometimes we can get in the heads of Romans by looking at the strangest of things. In this case, an old roof tile. When the Roman army came to the north of England, they settled in what would later become York and built a fortress here in about AD 71. Their Principia, or headquarters, was built on the site of the present-day York Minster, a huge building made of stone with giant columns running along the front of it. It would have been one of the most important and impressive buildings in the city. In fact, you can still see one of the columns outside York Minster today. We learnt about the Principia during the late 1960s, when the foundations of the Minster were being excavated and strengthened. This became known as the Great Dig. Roman artefacts of all different kinds were discovered, including valuable objects like jewellery and coins, and objects of faith and worship, such as gravestones and altars to Roman gods. Simple building materials like painted wall plaster and roof tiles were also found, and it is one of these very normal, everyday roof tiles that caught the archaeologist's attention, the Cairo tile. Now on the back of this tile, made by Roman hands nearly 2,000 years ago, is a symbol, the Cairo. It's made from the first two Greek letters for the word Christ, Chi, shown in Greek as an X, and Rho, in Greek as a P. The combination of these two letters became an early Christian symbol, much like the fish, or later the cross, for Christians to identify themselves to each other. This Cairo symbol was found marked into a piece of Roman roof tile that was discovered during the Great Dig. If it is a Cairo, then we have a very early example of the symbol being used before Christianity was accepted in the Roman Empire, possibly made by a Christian who might have had to practice their faith in secret. Why would they have marked a tile with the Cairo though? We don't really know. Maybe it was an act of rebellion, or to ask God's blessing on the building they were building. What it does let us know is that Christianity had spread all the way from Jerusalem to Iberacum in Britain in as little as 100 years. But the link with the Romans in York and the Cairo goes even further. Constantine was declared emperor here in York following the death of his father in AD 306. Constantine was known as an important leader for allowing Christians to practice their faith in the Roman Empire for the very first time. He had converted to Christianity himself after seeing a vision of a flaming Cairo symbol in the sky. He had this symbol painted onto his soldiers' shields before an important battle, which they actually went on to win. Constantine's conversion changed the face of religion in the Roman Empire, and with the adoption of Christianity, the power of the old Roman gods began to wane. To symbolise his new faith, Constantine used the Cairo symbol on coinage, tombstones, mosaics, cups, tiles and manuscripts, anywhere he could put it really, taking these two small letters from a personal symbol of faith, scratched where nobody could see it, to a crucial symbol of the Roman Empire. So even an everyday object, like a roof tile, can reveal so much about the past. But archaeologists have discovered many things whilst digging around the city. Let's hear about some other finds, this time from down by the River Ouse.
Hello there, my name is Fran and I work for an organisation called York Archaeology. Our team is made up of archaeologists, conservators, curators and lots of historical interpreters. In the past 50 years, York Archaeology has been involved in lots of digs around the city where we have discovered Roman remains, both in the military fortress and in the city that grew up around it. We've even been lucky enough to dig really close to the riverbanks on either side of the River Ouse in York. We think the river was very important to the Romans who settled here, both for people travelling to the city and for bringing in trade goods. Our excavations near the river have led us to think that it was the site of several warehouses, used for storing trade goods. We even found a fragment of an altar that we think was dedicated to the god Mercury, the god of trade, travel and communication. The stone is carved with a cockerel, a bird sacred to Mercury, carrying little bags, perhaps containing money or goods. Could this be a sign that trade was taking place here? Now, trade goods could include lots of things, such as building supplies, raw materials for craftspeople, and of course food. One essential supply was cereal grain, used for making bread, stews and puddings. And we actually found the remains of 2,000-year-old Roman grain stores down by the river, finding a large quantity of preserved grains, like these. Now these are very special because usually plant material buried in the ground doesn't survive very well, unless the soil is very wet or very dry. Another thing that helps plant remains to survive is if they've been burned, as this prevents them from rotting away as easily. Can you see how dark these grains are? That is because before they were buried in the ground, they were burned by a fire, but more on that later. So, what can we learn from these unusually well-preserved grains? Well, first they can tell us a little bit about the crops the Romans were storing here. Most of the grains found were a kind of wheat called spelt, which was very nutritious. We also found barley grains and a small amount of rye, a crop that was probably introduced to Britain by the Romans. Of course, food isn't the only reason to grow or import grain. Barley and rye could be used for brewing alcoholic drinks too. So, whether for baking or brewing, a Roman settlement needed a good supply of cereal grain. There were risks to storing large amounts though. A lot of this grain had been spoiled by damp conditions, being so close to the river. There were also signs that the store had been infested with grain beetles. But these could be clues as to why the grain was burnt. It might have been done on purpose to get rid of a spoiled grain supply that had become too damp or was full of pests. Alternatively, the Romans could have been trying to dry out the grain to feed to animals and accidentally overheated it. What do you think? We might never know the real answer, but it shows us how much we can learn from the smallest pieces of evidence the Romans left behind. These finds from Roman York give us a glimpse into what life was like almost 2,000 years ago, but there is still a huge amount to learn. This year, Iberacum Roman Festival invites you to dig deeper and discover more resources and workshops designed to bring you closer to the past. We hope you enjoy.